Really excited to be part of the initiative. I've been learning a lot over the past 3 days, amazing insights. So without any further delay, let me introduce our speaker, Mary Yang, a seasoned product leader and entrepreneur. She joined LinkedIn as the Director of Product in Jan 2020 to advance the platform's core messaging experience. Prior to LinkedIn, Mary was the Chief Product Officer at Smule, managing the company's product engineering and design teams. Under her leadership, Smule grew into a global platform with over 50 million monthly active users creating and sharing the music they love. Before Smule, Mary co-founded the US incubator of Renren and established the firm's internal product lines. Outside of work, Mary is a speaker and advocate of diversity, entrepreneurship, and lifelong learning. She advises multiple nonprofit organizations and high-growth startups in the consumer tech industry. Thank you for being here with us today, Mary. The floor is all yours. We are very eager to learn from you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all, the hosts and panelists, for the wonderful sessions. And I'm really excited for this panel. And thank you all who are in India that are like staying up really late for my session. And this is early morning time in the Silicon Valley, and I live in Sunnyvale here in the US. I'm really glad to get started here. And right, we'll get started. So today I'll be covering the topic on driving innovation and planning through design sprints. So you saw my title, currently that's Director of Product at LinkedIn, and you may wonder, it's like, why does this product leader have to do something to do with design sprints, right? So here's a little bit more details about how I was related to design. And obviously throughout the many years as a product leader, I had the honor in working with world-class designers in the companies I've been in. And also at Smule, I was also managing the design team for some period of time. And I also reorganized the whole organization into squad-based structures where PMs and designers and engineers have more autonomy and can be driving their own efforts in a faster manner, and allowing all the different departments in aligning early on in driving innovation. And also at LinkedIn right now, after I joined, I also started working with my design partner in driving one of the major vision sprints, the first one for LinkedIn Messenger, in really visualizing and thinking about the future of LinkedIn Messenger. And also at Smule, I was also there and driving some of the major redesigns and also one major vision sprint in rethinking the product and thinking about the future vision. So with that, here's what I'm going to cover today on the left-hand side on the slides. So I'll be quickly going over what is this design sprint and also offer you a step-by-step guide. So because of in the last few panels, you've already seen like some details on user testing and some other areas. So I will try to focus on the things that weren't covered. And also there's a bonus in the introducing vision sprint, which is a special edition of design sprints that is in a bigger scope and more so used to drive annual planning. And who will benefit from today's session? This session is not only for designers. I also hope other PMs and engineers and all those who would like to drive innovation can learn something from it. And as you learned from the last session and how designers can think like a PM, like a marketer or engineer. So this session, we're going to focus on how you can work together with PMs, designers, and engineers early on to drive your product forward. And for the vision sprint, this is a little bit more advanced. It is really for leaders of business units who can influence the overall product roadmap and the company's strategic planning. So without further ado, we'll first try to cover like design sprints, what, how, and why. So what is a design sprint? A design sprint is generally a 5 to 10-day process to answer key business questions through defining, brainstorming, designing, prototyping, and validation. So slightly different from the usual process that most of the companies are used to, starting from a PRD. This kind of process is usually good for innovating on some open-ended ideas where you don't have a specific solution just yet, and you can gather a group of people together to brainstorm and quickly come up with a couple of solutions that are worth testing out. And on the right-hand side, you can see a pseudo scenario over here. So because for a lot of the vision sprints I've been driving at my past companies, so not all the components have been released just yet, so I cannot use them all as examples. So here I'm using one pseudo example that hopefully you can relate to help you understand the whole process in a more concrete manner. So before the design sprint, like imagine that you're working for an online grocery delivery business and your manager called you this morning and saying that our retention looks really bad. And they ask you like, how can you grow like retention up and to the right? You don't know why, what caused that. You didn't quite understand the problem. And hopefully after the 5 to 10 days of design sprint, you feel confident, which is the green bubble down here, in that you have validated a design that is usable and also looks promising in solving the biggest member problem that we have now, that hopefully then is going to increase retention from there. So then your next step would be that let's actually develop it and beta it. So why do you want to do a design sprint, right? So again, in a lot of the companies, they call themselves data-driven, they call themselves like product-driven. And when you're doing an annual planning process, obviously you need to think a lot about numbers, about KPIs, about WAU, MAU, retention, and all those. So the design sprint provides a different perspective that takes a member-first approach and understand what are the biggest problems that your users face. And over the longer term, if you can bring in this perspective, I have no doubt that it is going to create long-term value for your customers and then also for your business. The second reason I mentioned is that it brings really a diverse team together, the PMs, designers, engineers, marketers, people in operations, and enables them to together brainstorm and innovate in a fairly short time frame. And the third of all is that this process also incorporates the validation of your design, so you're more confident about the usability of your design before you actually go in and develop it. Here's an overview of the general process of a design sprint. So you obviously want to do some preparation beforehand. And here is the core process of the sprint. So you want to spend the first 1 or 2 days, either half-time or full-time, in understanding the context of the problem, defining the problem that you want to solve. And then you want to spend the bulk of the sprint in brainstorming ideas first, and then designing for solutions. And you also want to quickly validate the solutions with your actual users and iterate on the solutions. With that, you can wrap up and do a quick recap on what are the next steps and also what are your learnings. So talking about design sprints, some of you may already be familiar or have heard of the very famous design sprint book by Google Ventures. This is one of the classic read for design sprints because they define in the early days some of the key processes for a design sprint. I have to mention here in that process that I'm talking about today is a slightly adapted approach. And I believe this is actually more flexible and realistic for most of the consumer tech businesses, because in the design sprint book, it kind of had to have a full group of engineers, PMs, and designers, like around 6 to 8 people locked together in a room for a full week. Sometimes that is a little bit short for you to actually bring real users to validate your ideas because of scheduling problems. And sometimes your engineers may not have time, like full time, to participate in your design sprint, or that sometimes they don't feel that they can contribute a lot when you're doing actual design. So the process that I'm going to introduce, I hope is actually more practical for you all. So step 0, like what do you need to prepare before you actually kick off a design sprint? So you want to understand what? You want to have a basic concept of the broader scope of the business problem. And in the online grocery delivery business pseudo case that we're going to use for this session, right? You can simply say that we have an influx of new users who have very poor retention on our site. We'd like to understand why that is the case. And we also want to help improve their purchasing experience. You want to identify the who in that you want to look for the key sprint team members that can help you address this business problem, which we're going to cover in more details in the next slide. And also you want to figure out how. You want to make sure that you send out calendar invites for the sprint team members. You prepare tools for brainstorming, designing, and testing. And also you start scheduling, inviting users to do actual user testing for you. So who in a design sprint team? So generally the full team, maybe 6 to 8 people, but you can live with only 2 to 3 core team members who will be full-time all the time. And your core team mainly is the driver, who usually is a product manager and can be a designer as well. And also you want to have 1 to 2 sprint designers. You can have more if you want to figure out like multiple solutions, but generally 1 to 2 is a good place to start with. And you want to make sure that your main stakeholder, the decision maker, is included in the loop throughout your design sprint, and especially as key checkpoints of that once you finish your design or once you figure out the next steps. You want to have a coordinator who could be the same person as the driver, but sometimes, according to my experience, you may need an extra pair of hands to help you schedule for interviews with the users, which could be a little like draining sometimes. So having a project manager who can, or a design researcher who can help in this process is going to make life a lot easier for the rest of the folks. You want to have experts who can participate in Brainstorm, like give you feedback at different times in the sprint. So those could be people, could be your good friends from data, from marketing or user research, basically who really understands what users are thinking, understand their personas, segmentation, can give you feedback from the member perspective. And in the grocery delivery case, right, obviously operations is really important for e-commerce. So you generally would want to bring them in as well to understand what you can do and what the limitations are. And also engineers are also great people to bring into the loop, both because they can give you feedback and also that if they're involved early on in the process, it's easier to get their alignment and help them quickly get kickstart on their development process as well. So then here's a map of who's going to participate in which part of the process. So the sprint prep usually is done by the driver and coordinator together. And everyone is expected to like participate in the understanding and defining of the problem. So that is really important because sometimes some certain design solutions, if you haven't really aligned with your stakeholders early on, then later on you could have a lot of problems in execution. And also if you haven't taken in perspectives from different people, then also it could be that in your development process, you're starting to have problems. And then for the next 3 to 5 days, you will want to involve like your core team and experts in the brainstorming session. And during the actual design, validation, and iteration, this could be simply your core team while keeping everyone else in the loop. And for the recap, it's generally good to either do a live recap or send out a summary to everyone so that everyone understands what your next steps are and also what you have learned from the sprint. And now we're getting to finally step 1, understanding and defining. So first, you want to understand the full context of the problem. So generally, the questions that would be good to answer during this process are, what our member journey looks like? What are the metrics indicating? In this sense, like why is retention dropping? Like, are we having new users that are like coming in, or did we break something so that all user retention are dropping? What are the members and customers are telling us? Do we have any channels for them to give us feedback? Like, how do we understand that? Or can we conduct some member calls if we don't have established channels? What has been done in the past? Do we have similar problems at some point? What are competitors doing? Is there something we can learn from them? And are there some constraints? Like in this case, like, do we have any constraints on the supply chain so that we can't really like backfill the stock for some of the frequently purchased items? And you want to exit the sprint with a how might we question. You want to agree on a problem that you want to solve because you started really from a broader business context and it's not as concrete as a problem to solve for the member just yet. So then here is like the step of understanding the metrics and personas that you're designing for. So you actually pretty quickly figured out what's going on with your retention through partnering up with your analysts, your data scientists. You found that recently actually had an influx of new members. So basically what happened is that your online grocery delivery business hasn't been a very big deal in your small town just yet, like before COVID. So your first early adopters were those who were like pretty demanding shoppers that don't have time. So they like have their very busy professional career. They don't really have a lot of time to do like shopping. And they're pretty demanding. They're not as price sensitive. They're willing to pay premium for the grocery delivery. But recently, because of the COVID situation, you were starting to see an influx of more casual shoppers who are not so tech savvy, who usually would go to their like local supermarket stores to do grocery purchasing. But now they're coming in because they're a little like afraid of the COVID situation and they're looking for other ways to like stock up their grocery supplies. But the problem they're facing right now, you very easily figure that out through like just calling up a couple of the new members and they're all complaining about one thing. And you also validate it through your data funnel analysis as well as that. how come you're always out of stock for what I want to buy, right? Because of the influx of members. So it looks like you're having some supply chain problems that you can't easily fix very immediately. So now we need to figure out what we can do there. So then from there, you start to map out the member journey for Priyanka, right? So this is a simplified process, which kind of skips through the member registration and many other steps, because I just want to show you a skeleton of what the member journey looks like. So Priyanka visits the site and she occasionally does search, but usually she will go to browse the categories that you have, like for vegetables, beans, like meat, and because that is like right below the news section. And why did you have the news section on the top of the page is because for your previous engaging customers, they are mostly looking for like new and interesting like a grocery to buy. They want to try out like pretty good organic brands. So they were browsing that a lot, and that's why you put that on the top of the page. And then you have categories, which is also fairly frequently used, and especially frequently used by Priyanka. So most of the time she will go there, she will select an item, and only 2% of the time she sees something in stock, right? Whereas for the things that are under the new category, like there's a much higher chance for the item to be in stock. So then you basically understand the crux of the issue, and you ended up like concluding this definition of the problem process by saying that, okay, how might we help Priyanka, who's a frequent casual buyer, like, and you can have more write-ups about her detailed persona to find relevant grocery to buy so that she can finish her purchasing process. And usually if you have limited number of members in your sprint and you wanted to define the problems to a narrower scope, that is also doable as well. So you can narrow down the problems to something that is like actually smaller than the scope. But for the sake of discussing brainstorming, I'm leaving it at a slightly broader scope. So then finally, with the problem in mind, with the how might we question in mind, you go into the next step of brainstorming and design. So brainstorming generally, I would encourage you to include everyone in it because they can provide different perspectives and may help you come up with pretty creative solutions. And then for the actual design process, again, this can be limited to the PM and designer. But you want to keep the broader team and especially the decision maker in the loop on what you're doing. So for the brainstorming part, generally the process is that you want to ideate, and based on whether your audience are all comfortable with sketching or not, you can decide to do sketching or simply just let them write down all the ideas that they have. But sketching is good, and if your audience doesn't mind, then having them to sketch together with you is generally a good idea. And then you want to present ideas, like categorize them and critique them. And you can either like do the voting together with everyone, or that the driver and the core team and decision makers can together figure out what are the 1 to 2 solutions that you want to focus on. So as for ideating, usually when you're doing it in person, you can write down your ideas on stickers, right? So that makes it pretty easy to categorize by person. And then you can also categorize it by themes, because oftentimes people will come up with similar ideas. So if you categorize them, it's going to be easier for voting. However, this is not easily doable when you're remote, working from home. So you can also try to mimic this process with other online brainstorming tools or simply through Google Spreadsheet. Give each one person a spreadsheet with like rectangular buckets so that they can put in their ideas over there. That is also make it very easy for you to aggregate all the ideas later. And then for the optional step of sketching, one pretty commonly used practice is that you bring forth A4 or letter size paper. You fold it into like 8 buckets. And the first round of sketching, you try to sketch out 8 ideas. And then in the second round, you pick out 1 or 2 of your favorite ideas and you go forward and sketch 1 idea, but develop the storyboard here, meaning the step-by-step process and give it more color to what you have in mind for your idea. So for simplicity's sake, here I'm just using a stickers approach and just writing down the ideas that your partners came up with in solving the like constantly out of stock problem for Priyanka. So in this process, one thing to call out is that you want to generate as many ideas as possible. So don't start criticizing people just yet for like, okay, that's a stupid idea. No idea is a bad idea. You can encourage people to think like very wildly without thinking about the constraints too much, because you will have a critique step where you will be evaluating how practical each solution is, and are they like really are addressing the top member need. And then from there, you can go into the critiquing process. And for time's sake, I wouldn't go into details of why we picked these ideas, but basically we decided to add a call to action on the item page when it's out of stock to say, notify me when it's back in stock, and also dynamically remove out of stock items from the top categories and backfill with similar items that are in stock. So what if you don't have a machine learning team just yet? So you can always manually categorize the most popular items and simply use a server-based logic. So these are the two ideas that we picked that we decided to further design for. The design process, I guess this is something that everyone else here is like more familiar with. So this is similar to your design approach. You want to start from the user flow first. You want to go with low fidelity, like quickly review with everyone, then go into the high fidelity, and then like plug in reviews here and there. So the thing to emphasize here is that you want to have regular check-ins with a larger team for early alignment and feedback. And oftentimes they will give you like very awesome feedback for you to like quickly iterate on your design. And also you want to make tools that make it easy for you to validate your design later. For instance, if you're considering the situation right now in that you may want to bring in remote testers, then having something that is easy, make it easy for you to do remote testing. For instance, the Figma design solution, and also like having the video conferencing tools in mind that you want to run with, getting those ready would be very beneficial for the next steps. And in this step, what you exit with is testable mocks or prototypes that your testers can actually test with. So from there, you can get into step 3, which is validation and iteration of your design. The participants will be the core team, but all team members are welcome to observe in the member interviews. And I actually strongly encourage you to bring in other team members who are engineers, marketers, or even your decision maker into 1 or 2 member interviews so that they can listen to member feedback firsthand. So it's also going to be easier for you to have later alignment. So why do you need to validate your design, right? So this is a step that like some companies would skip in their design process. And honestly, in like say like smaller bug fixes or smaller optimizations, or when you're developing in an online web environment and you have A/B testing tools, and you just want to test up a couple of different like button actions or like copy changes, then sometimes directly launching it and do A/B testing is going to be faster. But in a lot of other cases, when it's a bigger user problem and you don't really know what the feedback might be, or that you're developing for apps, like especially iOS, right? So the review process is longer. So if you wait for longer, then it's generally like harder for you to like turn it back. So if you can validate your design, then it's going to lower your development cost. And another thing is that we design for our users, not for ourselves. So in some bigger companies, there could be a lot of like design reviews where the stakeholders will have pretty strong opinions of feedback, which is awesome, which means that they're very passionate for your design. But at the same time, we could be like power users of our own products, or we could be not consider the target user segments for our product. So bringing in more member perspective is always valuable in understanding not only the what, but also the why, the user sentiment behind the problems. So for the testing process, the thing I want to introduce here is a concept called high iteration testing. And here kudos to my design partner at Sneal who invented this word. And actually at LinkedIn, we have a similar process that are called rapid labs. So either way, so the crux of this kind of user testing process is that while you're bringing in real users and have them test your product, you want to make sure that when you see repeated patterns of people telling you the same thing about usability or discoverability failing, meaning that they cannot find something that you want them to find, they cannot finish a task getting from point A to point B, then you actually can quickly iterate on the design, like in a direction that you think is more promising in like improving the discoverability or usability before you bring in the next group of users. So you don't have to wait to finish 10 user tests to conclude that they don't understand what this icon here called notify me actually means, right? Again, because they're like Priyanka is not so tech savvy. So she's looking at this like page where her favorite beans is here, and she doesn't understand what notify me really means. So then you may want to consider to change the copy or the design to make it more obvious to her that it means that notify me when those beans are back in stock again, so that she can understand how that benefits her. So some tips for remote user testing as we're doing it more and more nowadays. So a couple of things to call out is that you definitely want to think about an NDA. If you're developing something that's like fairly new, you don't want to have some important company information being leaked. And also make sure to send reminders, because people could just simply forget that they had an interview session scheduled with you. Prepare the questions and assumptions beforehand, and inviting broader team members, and have an assigned note taker for each section. There are many resources online now on how to conduct a user interview, and some of the panelists also talked about like similar approaches. So you usually want to start from warm-up questions, letting them telling you who they are, and also starting from simpler tasks so they don't feel like very frustrated during the process. Also ask them to think out loud and don't ask leading questions. Other than bringing real users for testing, there are many other methods to test as different steps of your design process and sometimes even development process. A couple of interesting ideas that I've tried before include digital ads. So if your marketing department are actually acquiring users through Facebook ads, Google ads, or ads on other platforms, then running some digital ads for some pseudo concepts for your company is going to be interesting, as long as it doesn't have any causes any bad impression on your company. So if you think that is acceptable, then it can help you test at scale as to the user intent and also the value proposition. Is that something that the user appreciates? And you can also run more graphic-based surveys. For instance, one tool that I used before was called Pickfu. So it simply allows you to put up a couple of visual mocks and concepts and let users pick A or B. It's very simple, A or B. And if they choose A, they will also tell you why A. So this is extremely helpful when you have new visual concepts to test for. And also survey panels are interesting, and you can even test for app stores. So one fun story to share from me is that at one company I was working at, so we were looking to revamp our brand. And the design teams presented very holistic design solutions with 2 different scheme colors, green and purple. And they strongly recommended purple because of their understanding on user persona and all the feedback that they're given. However, the stakeholder in that sense felt that the green color was much better. So, and asked the team to actually continue into this, right? So how do we actually convince the stakeholder? So 2 things that we did. We actually came up with a full set of designs for the key mocks of the concepts under the green color and under the purple color, put them on Pickfu. We also went into App Store to change our app icon into this green color versus the purple color. And very quickly through the App Store test, we found that the conversion rate on the green color simply sucked because members were thinking about this more as something related to finance and something related to safety, but not in the entertainment category that we were in. And also in the graphics survey, we also figured out the same thing, is that they were correlating this with something else. So this is simply a fun story to share with you on how you can creatively use different types of tools to validate your design and also make it easier to convince your stakeholders. So now you finally finish validation and iteration of your test, and you go to the recap step where you always want to include all team members. Either you send a summary to all of them or you do a live recap with all of them. So the things you want to recap on are the final design, test results, the next steps. And also I'm calling out here, the learnings from this sprint is also really important to share with everyone. Because maybe your first couple of times doing a design sprint, the process didn't run very smooth. People could get frustrated at certain points. So understanding how you can improve the process to make it more adaptable to your own business situations is also going to encourage everyone to continue to support you in the process. With that, we've quickly talked about design sprints, and as a bonus, I want to talk to you about a special edition of design sprints, which is called a vision sprint. So how is a vision sprint different, right? So usually a design sprint looks at one smaller problem to solve, but a vision sprint look at a longer horizon, usually over 1 year, and sometimes up to 20 years, 2 years, and sets the design framework and vision, and also generates ideas to solve your key business problems. It can be consisted of multiple smaller design sprints that can be combined together for a holistic prototype. And it's usually driven by product and design leaders together in a business unit before annual planning. So I'm now actually driving and wrapping up one for LinkedIn Messenger. But why do you want to do a vision sprint, right? So generally in annual planning process, most of the companies will do strategic planning and financial planning, which more so comes from a concept of like what is important for our business, what is important for our financial situation, right? But in this case, for the vision sprint, it actually gives you a different perspective from design, from the members, in generating a broad stroke of bold vision to inspire and guide the team. And also sometimes for bigger platforms, you may have a lot of different design teams and business units trying to change the same product at the same time. So the design could get a little cluttered over time. And the vision sprint also allow you to align people on the overall vision and information architecture for your design, so that it's still clean and easy to understand for your audience in the next 1 or 2 years. In the general process over here, the product and design leader need to really work together in identifying the key business problems and user personas. You want to set the themes for the sub-sprints and identify the sprint drivers. For instance, for the messenger sprint, the themes that I said was that looking at the inbox experience, the conversation experience, the top of the funnel education and awareness, and also the premium messaging experience. You want to make sure to create templates and process docs because for each of the sprint, it's going to be driven by a different set of teams, right? And they may not always be very familiar with the process. So giving them a step-by-step guiding in process and also creating templates for them to fill in what they need to do at each of the steps is going to make it much easier for you to scale this process and have a bigger team work on it together. You want to make sure that you sit in reviews and stay in sync with the team to provide support and feedback, and also make sure that you encourage the team to recap after each mini sprint. And after all the mini sprints are finished, you want to conclude and consolidate the mocks and prototypes into presentable format so that you can share it with other business partners and also feed it into the annual planning process. So that's the last step, of sharing and planning with the broader team. So since recapping is always a good habit to have, so let's have a quick recap on what we learned today. So what we covered are the what, why, and hows for design sprints, and also a special edition of vision sprint. And if I were to hoping you to take away a couple of key important things is that you want to, with a design sprint, you can bring in diverse perspectives from different departments and stakeholders to help you find creative solutions and also form alignment on your solutions early on. And also design sprints help the company really having a member first perspective, which I believe always creates longer term value for the business. And I also encourage you to validate and quickly iterate on your design. And most of the time it's going to save you time and also development cost. So that's all for my presentation today. I'm really thankful for all of you in joining my session and happy to take any questions from here.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mary. That was a very insightful session. And the way you explained it with real life examples were really good for us to understand the process. So we have a lot of questions coming in, but I have a quick question before we go on. How do we measure a success of a sprint, a design sprint, that at the end of the sprint, how do I know I have accomplished what I have accomplished? What metrics do we use?
Right. So because this design isn't something that you have actually launched in real life just yet, so I would say the biggest success is that you have aligned the group that are your experts and stakeholders, especially the stakeholder, in that they're supportive of you and going forward and actually testing your design. Because sometimes the solution you come up with could be something very different from what they originally imagined, right? Based on their experience, they could say, why didn't you do this and that? But here, you've involved them early on in the process in defining what the problem to solve. And also you have real user feedback, like sometimes quantitative, sometimes qualitative, and share with them what our members are actually saying, so that hopefully they have more confidence in your design and be very supportive in funding you to actually develop the solution.
Okay. So one of the key aspect of this running the sprint successfully is also that you define the problem right. Now, when we are defining the problem as a group together and within such a pressure cooker environment, how do we ensure what are the tools, what are the preparation we'll have to do in advance to ensure we have got the problem right?
Right, totally. So that I think is really going back to understanding the context. So generally, if you're able to answer those 6 key questions that I listed out, including what our members telling us, what is metrics telling us, what we have done in the past, and bring in really the right people to help you understand those contexts, then you should be pretty good to go, I would say.
Okay, so we have a question from Harshit. So he says, how do you suggest to address the similar situations in your example as you explained through in any product verticals across the industry involving a time crunch and the pressure situations to come up with something as quick as possible? So I think he's asking for ways to brainstorm ideas and solve problems across different product verticals, given the time pressure involved in these sprints.
Yeah, totally. Again, like this design sprint process I'm talking about looks like a whole process. You have to go from end to end. But actually, in practicality, different businesses have different situations. So you can actually take parts of the design sprint and adapt it for your own need, right? So in this context, I think you're really asking about step 1, which is understanding and defining the problem, right? So therefore, bringing in everyone together from like, those stakeholders and driving the brainstorming and discussion from there is really important. And really, it kind of really also depends on who you're bringing in. Are they like all like PMs and designers from the different business units? Or is that within your own department, like PMs, designers, engineers are having different perspectives on things? So a pretty critical step is like first let everyone be heard, like let them voice out their opinions and what do they think is the crux of the issue and what kind of solution they think there will be. But try to focus on the what first. It's like, what do we think the problem is, right? Then go into the next step, like what the solutions are. So that will generally make this brainstorming session a little bit easier. And you should generally be able to conclude together on like what the align on a problem and the solutions. But occasionally you can't. And in those processes, you would need a decision maker if that really is the case. So that's why it's important to actually bring in a stakeholder who have the authority to actually make the final call while taking in the inputs from the different partners and experts.
Okay. So we have another question from Archana. So most of the resources online that we read or hear about design sprints talk about running the sprints with all the members being in one place. Now that a lot of teams are functioning remotely, is there any special tips and tricks that we have to take into consideration for running remote sprints?
That's an awesome question. And actually, this is one thing that I really trying to optimize for the LinkedIn Vision sprint as well, the Messenger Vision sprint, because we're running it in a remote manner. So the first thing I called out over here is that you don't need everyone, like all 6 to 8 people all together, all like synchronously like discussing problems all the time, because that is already getting really challenging in bigger organization, and especially in a work from home situation. So therefore, I called out the core teams you want to have, right? 8 PM and 1 to 2 designers. And the coordinator is really there to help you like drive through the whole process and coordinating and scheduling all those meetings and sending out calendar invites. So the quick tips in a remote situation, the first one is make sure you have very clear guidelines and help everyone understand the things that they will need to do in this particular process. And second, schedule everything beforehand, whether it is for your like brainstorming sessions. And I mentioned that you don't need to do it full time in the 1 to 2 days. You can say that, okay, the first day we want to understand the context or set out a place for people to start in that, okay, here are the things we already know and here are the things we need to research like you can do that in 1 hour, right? And then everyone go. The experts say like your data partners will go in and help you like understand the data. And hopefully by the end of the day, then you have everyone taking their results back so you can go back to synchronous again. And also for your user interview sessions, you want to definitely make sure that you schedule for those at least 1 week ahead of time, because people have their like own schedule. They can't always be very flexible, right? And also sending out calendar invites for those to make sure that they can actually show up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of us are suffering with the remote situation now and managing our times and meetings.
Right. Oh, yeah. Maybe one last thing to call out is that you don't always have to do everything synchronously. For instance, a review of your design, because your whole team could be very busy. They could be on Zoom meetings all the time right now. Your stakeholder could be extremely busy when they're in this work from home situation. So you can simply do by either on like Slack or some other real-time communication chat channel, or through emails, right? If your company isn't so used to using real-time chat for work collaboration, in sending out at least like 1 or 2 days a recap of like, okay, here is where we are on design, here's what we accomplished, here's what we're doing next steps, and here are the action items for someone else if you actually need help from them.
Okay, great. So I have a follow-up question on one of the things you pointed out about having your users that's going to test your solution in advance. So is there a specific number of users that we should assemble beforehand so that to ensure the result that comes out is valid?
Right, totally. And here I want to add one more thing, right? Is that you can test everyone through like a user test. For instance, you cannot test price sensitivity. Usually you cannot very accurately test user intent. So the purpose of bringing real users for user interviews in this format usually is better for testing usability or discoverability. Basically, can people find the thing you just developed, right? If it's buried, like why do you even bother to develop that whole thing that takes you 6 months, right? And also, like, can people get from point A to point B? So you ask them to like do a search. Can they actually finish that search process? You ask them to finish a purchase. Can they actually get through that process? If you repeatedly see people like getting stuck somewhere, usually 2 to 3 people getting stuck is already strong enough signal in telling you that there's something not usable, and you should probably iterate on your design before actually going into development. And as for ideal size of people to bring in, ideally you have like 6 to 8 people to validate like one major set of design. And usually after like 2 to 3 people, you can already start iterating once you understand the user pain point or where they get stuck very quickly. And in a bigger organization, if you actually have a user research team, what I encourage you to do is to actually set up minimally bi-weekly trains of bringing in users, right? For instance, on Thursdays and Fridays, you always try to bring in 6 to 8 members to like give you feedback. So then it's almost like a release train, right? So anyone who has design ready can go in and test it. And usually for one user interview session, you can test max 2 to 3 major ideas, and don't go beyond that. Otherwise, they would feel pretty exhausted.
Okay. Yeah, so that's really exciting to see that we can get good insights from testing with 6 to 8 users. But if it gives results, it's amazing. Okay, so I have one more question from Saravanan. So one of the things about building a product or when we are ideating is that we have a lot of documentation that builds over time, and we like to document everything that's happening, the decisions that are taken. So what do we do with respect to the design sprints? Is it extensively documented, or we just go through it and say, this is the problem and this is the solution that we came up with?
Right. I would suggest that because this process is kind of a process is more for addressing open-ended questions. So you want to keep documentation like pretty light and simple, basically like very to the point. And generally at the end of the design sprint, you have in mind some sort of like solution, and then you can start formalizing your PRD from there. So if you want to have some sort of documentation throughout the process, then the thing you can try is a product brief, right? Which only captures the highlight of the context of the problem, the general solution, without going into all the details of the features or into like what engineers actually need to do during the process. And afterwards, based on what your engineering discipline is, you still want to put together a PRD. But sometimes in an agile process, we know that we want to start developing once your PRD is 70% ready, right? Because a lot of the details will be added in the development process as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary. Thanks a lot for such insightful inputs and practical examples. So we are stopping it here in the interest of time. And thank you all for the participants who have been with us throughout the session. And please give us your feedback. And here is a virtual certificate of appreciation to you from Institute of Product Leadership and all the participants. Thank you so much for your time. And the QR code will lead to your own Hall of Fame where we can find the recording for the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.